Hi. I don't really know you saw the title, you saw the thumbnail. This video, I'm going to be ranking the challenges from both of the Reboot seasons. So obviously, if you haven't seen either of those seasons, big spoilers, probably don't watch this video. I'll try my best to not specifically speak on contestants, but it doesn't really matter because even the sprites that I'm going to use for this tier list are going to show people how far they made it. So yeah, don't watch this if you don't want spoilers. Before we get into the ranking, I'm going to quickly go over what each tier means to me because I think with a lot of these tier list videos, tiers mean very different things to people. So I'm just going to quickly go over what each tier means to me. F tier is the only tier on this list which means actively bad to me. This is a challenge that for one reason or another, either it's really stupid, it's a complicated premise, or it's just like not fair, which I don't think we get into many of this season, but yeah, you could definitely think of every season to which challenge is just blatantly unfair. Those are definitely land in F tier for me. These are challenges that not only fail to keep my interest, but also fail to make an enjoyable episode. D tier to me means just not enjoyable. It's not a bad challenge, but there's just not really anything that makes this interesting to me, so I just have very meh, don't care feelings about this challenge. C tier to me is I kind of enjoyed this challenge. I think there's aspects of this challenge that I like, but I wouldn't really want to see a challenge like this in any capacity in any future seasons if we obviously got them, which I don't think we are going to get, but imagining if we got future seasons, I wouldn't want to see a challenge like this in that season. B tier is when we start to get to pretty good challenges. I don't think this challenge is amazing by any degree, either because it's not super creative or it doesn't force its contestants to do interesting things, or it's placed in a bad point in the season, but nonetheless through all of that, I still think it's a good challenge and it was interesting for me to watch. A tier touches on all the stuff I already said for B tier, but it's also adding the factor of I think this challenge impressed me. Conceptually, I think challenges in A tier are really interesting without having to add a bunch of, unnecessary detail or crazy game show feel, which this season starts to lean into a lot. And lastly, S tier matches everything I said for A tier, but the difference maker between A tier and S tier is, quite honestly, personal. This is where the distinct factor of this being my tier list comes into play, because I find this challenge especially enjoyable for some other reason. And with that, let's begin. The first challenge we're going to go over is the very first challenge of the very first season. This challenge involved two players blindfolded from each team being led by two other players through verbal commands through an obstacle course. Well, the remaining players of the team are on the side below the collars. The blindfolded people are bringing back, I think, a flag, and they're placing it on the platform which the other contestants lift up when they get it there. I believe this challenge takes inspiration from a Survivor challenge, which if you don't know is the elimination-based voting show that Total Drama is based off of. Now, as I said earlier when describing the tiers, I do give this challenge a bit of leeway just for where it's placed in the season. It's the very first challenge, and it has to balance introducing this entire new cast for half the episode and then actually having a challenge for half the episode and the vote out, so this challenge doesn't have a lot of screen time, which is why it's not very interesting to me. For a first challenge with an entire new cast, there's about 8 people who don't really get to do a lot. Really, this challenge is about the 2 blindfolded people through the obstacle course on each team, and then, kind of the 2 callers on each team, which again, I get why they did it because they didn't have a lot of screen time, but it doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of people didn't really get to do a lot. Now, I don't dislike this challenge. I do think it's enjoyable and a nice intro to the season, but I wouldn't call this challenge particularly good. I do enjoy how simple it is, and I do think there's a lot of fun moments in it, but as I said before, and the biggest issue I have with this challenge, a lot of the cast isn't really involved. And seeing how we get a first boot in this episode who wasn't predominantly shown because they weren't a part of the challenge, this challenge isn't really anything special to me. I wouldn't place an F tier because again, I don't think it's a bad challenge, and it did manage to thoroughly keep my interest, so it stays at a D tier, but I can't reasonably see myself ranking this challenge any higher than C tier because there wasn't a lot of interest to this challenge. I do think it was cool they used a Survivor challenge to kind of, pay homage to what this show was based off of, but besides that, this challenge wasn't anything groundbreaking. Next we have episode 2. I don't remember what this challenge was called. I don't remember the name of many of these challenges because they were kind of weird, and Total Drama, as forever, always tries to make pun names into their challenges, and it's kind of lame to me. But the gist of this challenge is that both teams went onto a pirate ship, and they were given cabbage heads to shoot in the cannons towards the other team to either try and sink the ship or knock all the other contestants off. I think this challenge was pretty alright. I really enjoyed it for its placement in the season being the second pre-merge challenge, because as I just said with the first one, a big issue to me was that it didn't have a lot of variety in the character moments. But I think this challenge offered a lot of that in spades. Now, as you're going to find out later in this tier list, I'm not really that big a fan of these gravitas challenges that have a big set piece. I usually enjoy much simpler challenges. However, I think in comparison, this challenge wasn't nearly as bad as the other challenges we see in the season when it comes to its large scale. And it also being the second challenge of this, 5-6 year returning series, I think its large scale was fine. I was also pleased by this challenge decision reason to opt using cabbage heads instead of cannonballs, since we see in a lot of later challenges that they can tend to be a bit unnecessarily brutal, which is never something I've been a fan of in this show. And even though they were cabbage heads, they did offer some very brutal looking hits. I also like the character drama of assigning a team pirate captains of the boats, because not only does it fit into the challenge theme really well, but it's a really fun standard to be setting on the teams so early into them being created. I could see this being an unpopular decision, but I really don't find anything that I dislike with this challenge, and I find it in quite a high A spot. I think it's just barely off from being an S tier, because despite liking this challenge's placement in the season, I didn't enjoy how one team had less player than the other, because they just came out of the first episode, and this entire challenge is based off the elimination premise of eliminating the other team. I guess it did get even out by Axel kicking Ripper off the boat, but if she hadn't done that, then that team would have had an advantage, which I'm usually not a fan of with pre-merge challenges of one team having advantage over the other. Next we have the challenge from episode 3. I don't really know how to explain this challenge. Basically each team one at a time had to go through an obstacle course and grab a number, which they would take a safe chamber where one of their teammates earlier quote-unquote volunteered to be inside of it as it slowly fills with water. This challenge really isn't that interesting to me. I do find the obstacle course itself to be very interesting, but it's really not that creative. We've seen obstacle courses on this show a lot, and sometimes they're done right, but just due to the sheer amount of times we've seen them, they really don't pique my interest anymore, especially since we've seen like the same elements that we see in other obstacle courses like the ladder wall climb, the rope swing, the slippery grease. And unlike other obstacle courses, which manage to be interesting by having all of the contestants, or like contestants in certain groups going through different parts of the obstacle course, there's always something interesting and new happening, this challenge essentially just had 6 people from each team go through the same obstacle course 6 times, which lost its interest pretty quickly. The end section of the obstacle course with the teammates in the chambers that are filling with water was kind of interesting, I guess. It made some interesting character moments for Damien and Julia, with like Damien freaking out and Julia still being the zen persona, so she's like chill about it and trying to get Damien to calm down, and that was interesting, but didn't really do anything. The best way I'd explain it is that it was like artificially made stakes where you knew neither of them were going to drown to death or be in any trouble. Really the only story-worthy like change made from this was Damien firmly cementing his decision to wanting to quit the game because this was too much, but that's literally it. And besides Damien being the highlight for this challenge to me, nothing else really hits very special way to me, so I put this challenge in D tier for not really caring about it. Next we have the challenge from episode 4, which is basically capture the flag but with each other's skulls, and there was a bunch of interesting set pieces and weapons they could use like stink bombs and water guns and moving up and down contraptions and obviously the jackhammer. I might be mistaken in saying this, but I think with even all the total drama challenges we've had, with like Island especially being around this theme of summer camp, I don't think we've ever seen any challenge that's really like capture the flag aspects before. Again, I could be wrong, but at least I don't think there's any prominent capture the flag challenges we've seen before. And because of that, I really enjoyed this challenge. It was really straight to the point. I enjoyed how the entire cast got to like separate from themselves and have their own things going on, which up till this point of these 3 challenges we already discussed, we haven't had a chance to happen with everyone going off to do their own thing. Scary Girl and Damien, MK hacking the challenge, Ripper getting lured as a team leader figure and going to get this goal by himself, Emma winning the challenge for her team, Julia, Bowie, and the Hockey Bros all defending this goal on their team and fighting Millie and Priya. There's a lot of interesting altering things happening at play here, which is always my favorite kind of challenges because I think it allows for the most character growth for everyone. Frankly, I can't find a single thing I don't like about this challenge, and when I think of the challenges in these reboot seasons, this is one that sticks out to me as being a very special and enjoyable challenge to watch. So this goes into our first S tier. And top from bottom, after that one, we during episode 5, which I don't know how to like put without making it sound dumb because it's so dumb, but essentially there were dinosaurs released on the island and all the teams had to sneak across the island getting to the other side first to win the challenge. But the kicker to this challenge was that all the contestants were given burritos in the morning, so they all had to expel gas, and that made it hard to sneak around, so they had to be sneaky about their... What a stupid, terrible challenge. I don't even want to have to explain this. I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory why this goes here. As if having a character like Ripper who was entirely based around farts wasn't bad enough, they had to give us our first and only challenge ever in total drama to be solely centered around farts. So the cast being super secretive and dramatic about hiding their farts was already like a terrible thing that puts this challenge into the negatives for me. But it doesn't help this challenge that conceptually it isn't interesting. We've seen a lot of challenges with this premise of like getting across the island making it to the other side. In fact, we even see another challenge like this in these reboot seasons, which in my opinion did it a lot better. I'm gonna leave it there. I don't think there's anything else for me to say about this challenge. Very bad, very disappointed, and they could have done basically anything else, and I would have enjoyed it more than this. In fact, this challenge, like, I obviously don't have all the challenges from every Total Drama season ranked on this list, but if I did, know that this challenge would still manage to find about probably like the bottom 5 to me. Maybe even the worst challenge of all time. I mean, I probably wouldn't put it there because there are some challenges that I think are worse just because they're completely unfair and break the game that I would rank below this. But when it comes to a challenge that was completely fair and conceptually just sucks, this ranks probably as low as I've ever gotten for Total Drama. Next up, we have the challenge on episode 6. Essentially, both teams were given a catapult and were instructed to crank up the catapult and have one team member go inside the catapult, in which they release the catapult and try to land in like point designated holes in a line, and the further along there's more points, and around the point holes there are moats with bad things in them. And this challenge is exactly what I mean when I say a convoluted extreme gravitas challenge that just isn't interesting to me. It has a lot of issues that the episode 3 challenge had to me, in which there's not a lot of interesting things going on because you kind of have to do like one at a time of each character going in the catapult and launching themselves and then trying to land in a point hole or maybe landing in a moat and then like getting attacked, which haha, they get hurt. There's not really a lot of stakes to be had here. Now with that said, I do think this challenge managed to have some pretty interesting character moments. There was obviously the thumbnail here of Bowie and Raj kissing for the first time. There was Z flying through the air and taking off his foot to become more aerodynamic and kind of going on his crazed, definitely not stoner trip. But even outside those two very big moments, there were other character moments that were interesting, but for the most part I wouldn't really accredit the challenge to them. So this challenge also goes to D tier to me. However, I would put it over the episode 3 challenge for the only reason being that there was more interesting stuff going on with what's being inside of the moats being hidden until somebody goes into it and then you get to see what they deal with. There's a surprise aspect to it, which episode 3 didn't have. Next we have the challenge from episode 7, which was the first merge challenge of this season. This challenge involved people going into groups of 2 to go achieve an egg from I don't remember, it's a strong deadly bird, that's what you need to know. I think this challenge was pretty interesting. I didn't really like how they did like the dangerous animals thing, especially after they just tried to do the dangerous animals thing in episode 5 with the dinosaurs. So I wasn't a big fan of how they made a never like not realistic, I don't know, maybe this is a realistic creature but it doesn't feel like a realistic creature, but I just don't think this challenge is very optimally placed, and I personally would have made the next challenge we're going to talk to the first merge challenge instead of this one, but you know. But besides this being a bit of a poor placement for a first merge challenge, I don't think there's much else wrong with this challenge. I mean, again, this thing I already mentioned with the creatures, but I like how simple the premise of the challenge is to just get an egg from this dangerous bird and then bring it back to Chris. Also, I think the decision to have the cats break out into duos was the right call, because in these sort of challenges where everyone goes off to do their own things, especially in a merge challenge where you'd have to go over like 10 people doing their own things, it could get a bit hard to find something for everybody, and also allow the show to explore more specific new character dynamics that we didn't get to see a lot of, like Z and Ripper and Chase and Julia, so I enjoyed that part of it too. And I would find this challenge an A tier. I did really enjoy it, but again, there were those big issues to me, which is why this one's like a much further A tier, as opposed to the episode 2 challenge, which is like right on the brink of being S tier to me. So don't get these two confused on being too similar. Next is the challenge from episode 8, which is essentially the bunch of discussing this but not in a team phase. Contestants were given really gross meals to eat, and you had to eat the entire meal without throwing up to make it onto the next round. Now obviously this challenge isn't super creative because it's basically just taking full on inspiration from Bunch of Discussing This. However, it's not doing it in a way where it's stealing directly from Bunch of Discussing This. It's kind of paying homage for the first season. Kind of like how I said of episode 2 of this being a season after like 5 or 6 years of waiting for a new season. It was kind of nice for the show to pay homage to this challenge from the very first season. And I like the workaround of having the meal in the beginning of the episode be this rainbow colored ice cream, so all the throw up is rainbow colored and it isn't as gross, because yeah, no, that wasn't a fun part of Bunch of Discussing This for me. The rainbow colored throw up made it a lot easier to watch this episode. Unfortunately, for all those positives listed, there's still a couple of issues I have this challenge of it, again, not being super creative, and I also don't feel like it offered a lot of creative character stuff. The only character I can really think who had creative stuff for this challenge in particular was Z. Actually scratch that because Millie also had the interesting thing of quitting the challenge before it began. The character stuff wasn't bad, it just wasn't as much as I typically prefer. So I do find this an A tier because I do think it's a really good challenge and I really did enjoy watching it, but I don't see it quite an S because it wasn't creative enough for me, and I really wish they would have had it been the first merge challenge because I would have paid homage to Island a lot better to me. Next challenge is from episode 9. This one's kind of like confusing to explain. Everybody was given a raft and they rafted down a river where they came into a bunch of shenanigans, and then they went down a waterfall, more shenanigans, and then they go through a field with a bunch of geysers, which is more shenanigans. And then at that point, that's really when the challenge like begins to me. I guess you could kind of say it begins at the geysers because some stuff happens there, but everything before that wasn't really of importance. I mean, everybody was right with each other. Nobody really had like an opportunity to get lost or anything. And I think this challenge could have been interesting if it was kind of like through each stage people fail, like they lose their canoe at the canoe section, they get lost in the waterfall, the water section, they get launched away at the geyser sections. It didn't even have to be a ton of people, it was just like a couple people lost each time, so it could feel like there's some progression. That would have been a bit more interesting to me, but as it stands, this challenge just doesn't feel like it begins until it gets to a volcano, which, by the way, for some reason is filled with honeys and big bees, and the first to get to the top of the volcano and ring the bell at the top would win. The challenge is just so weird to me, and the fact that everything before it kind of felt like background information, it doesn't exactly make this challenge have a strong impression on me. With all those negatives out of the way, I actually did enjoy like the set pieces of this challenge a lot more than I did for other challenges. I think they were pretty interesting and, well, grounded for the most part until the bee volcano, but like in the rafts it was just trouts jumping out and hitting the people in the canoes, it was bears attacking them, it was a waterfall, it was crocodiles, it was geysers. They were all very grounded, normal things you'd expect to see on a raft trip, and I really enjoy with all the crazy challenges and stuff these seasons throw at us when they can just be grounded and feel like a normal show. And even the bee honey volcano wasn't a bad set piece, and I enjoyed seeing the likes of like Bowie and Julia fight it out on the top to win invincibility. The other issues I listed are still very prevalent to me, don't get me wrong, but I don't think this was necessarily a boring challenge. There was a lot of elements I did enjoy, and I think this challenge could have been good. It was just a struggle of lack of focus that really threw me off. So this goes into our first B tier, because I do consider this a good challenge, but I also consider it a very sloppy and confusing challenge. Next is the challenge from episode 10, which I also believe is a Survivor-inspired challenge. This one is really simple. The final 6 contestants all stood on tall wooden poles in the water, and invincibility would go to the person who remained standing on it last. Throughout the challenge, Chris would offer some temptations like food and money to get the contestants to step down. I am in love with this challenge. I think this challenge is really special, because in a season where there's sea monsters, in a season where they make massive slides for people to go down to land into a hoop, in seasons where they make an entire ice fortress, it's nice to have a challenge that's just completely grounded. There's nothing crazy, there's nothing you have to stretch your imaginations for in this cartoon. You can view it as if this was a real life challenge, which I guess it is because it's Survivor based, but shut up, and actually enjoy the stakes at hand. With that said, I do love how centered and how normal this challenge is, but it's kind of boring. And if it wasn't for the Chase and Emma drama of them like fighting on these poles, not being able to get away with each other, this would have been a very boring challenge of these contestants just standing on the poles being like, you gonna quit soon? No, I'm not gonna quit soon. Like, that's basically what it would have been of how the Chase and Emma stuff, which I also was never really that big a fan of the Chase and Emma stuff, so the fact that the episode's selling point was a relationship I did not give a shit about doesn't help the challenge as a whole. However, I'm willing to look past those issues I have and still give it a pretty favorable ranking, but really I can't see myself ranking it much higher than A tier past the episode 7 challenge. I don't think this is a bad challenge. I really did enjoy it, and I do think I'd like to see a challenge in this capacity again, but I just think there has to be some more elements to it, if at the very least, more interesting rewards, something like maybe a letter from home so there's emotional stakes, or like an advantage in the game so there's strategic stakes. Like, things like that could have made it really interesting, even like if it was an advantage, like you get an advantage like extra vote and elimination ceremony or something like that would have messed with the game, would have made this challenge so much more interesting. If that was the case, I probably would put it in S tier, maybe even S for this entire season, but the fact that it isn't there, it's relying on a lot of heavy work from the cast to carry the intrigue of what's happening in the challenge, which I don't think is bad, but I think it's asking a lot, especially when it was all Chase and Emma, which again I didn't like. Next is a challenge from episode 11, which unfortunately the still here isn't of the challenge. It's from Emma getting eliminated, but this challenge involved the final 5 being given phones and having to take selfie with dangerous animals to get points. The more dangerous the animal, the more points you would get for that animal. I don't even know how to put my thoughts into words for this challenge. This challenge is perfect to me. It has everything that I have been talking about, everything that I look for in a challenge. It's grounded, the danger is palpable, the character connections are there, and this challenge is creative, and it also fits into the season theme of being like new gen total drama. there is not a single thing to me wrong with this challenge. I don't know if you could ever really like see it again, but much like I said of the other S tier, when I think of the challenges of these two collective seasons, this is probably one of, if not the first challenge that pops into my head. This is an easy S tier, and it might manage to stay up there for the entire ranking. Next we have the challenge from episode 12, which involved trapping the final four into a dark cave, and the challenge revolved around who could get the most golden coins inside the cave and get out of the cave, and whoever had the most gold coins would win invincibility. I don't think this challenge is bad when it comes to one thing in particular, and that is the set pieces. I really enjoy all the different spots they find in a cave, and even though they're, a little extreme, like the toxic waste pit and the massive spider, there were things that actually, match the setting. I mean, a creepy, dinky cave like that, having a toxic waste pit isn't too crazy. Having a big, scary spider isn't too crazy. The sea monster's a little weird, but even then, it's not too crazy for a creepy cave, and at least it falls in the theme of the challenge. Honestly, the biggest issue I have with this challenge is where it's placed in the season. This is a challenge before the finale, and I wish it could have been something a bit more personal to the cast, and the challenge was a good setting for that, where you had these two duos of Millie and Priya and Bowie and Julia go through the caves, and that was interesting, and I think it was well done, but I also think a challenge like this could have benefited by just being earlier in the merge, or maybe even being a pre-merge challenge of having teams get to know each other, because to me, when it comes to like character connections and challenges, there's two kind of challenges. One of them is a challenge that helps establish and builds relationships, and the other one is a kind of challenge that builds off those established relationships. And this feels like a challenge that is meant to build relationships, but we already have these relationships pretty established at this point, so I don't feel like it should have been the challenge before the finale. Besides that, I don't think it was a bad challenge. I wouldn't say it's super good, like good enough to be in the A slot, because even though the set pieces were grounded in the setting, they were still a bit much for me, but I would put it very, very high B tier. Next we have the finale challenge of season 1. Technically there's kind of like two challenges in here. There's the one that got Millie eliminated, and then there's the one that actually decided a winner. I'm going to try and accumulate both of them into my one challenge ranking, and speaking generally on both of them, I don't think either of them were really that great. First challenge is pretty basic. I mean, each finalist randomly got assigned an eliminated contestant to help make them a raft that they would ride through the lava moat, and then the first two to get to the end would compete in the next part. And the lava moat was a cool setting, and there was a lot of drama here with Priya, Bowie, and Millie, which I did really enjoy, and I think the simplicity itself was fine. If I was ranking this challenge just on the first half, it wouldn't be that bad. I'd honestly put it like, middle of B tier around here. The issue is the second half, because the second half is so much less high stakes and so much less interesting than the first half. The first half, you have 3 people paddling through lava on their boats, battling each other with their sticks, jumping through the end of lava moats, and all this drama between Millie and Priya. And the second half of the challenge is like, hey, go up this mountain with a stubborn goat and then milk it, and then drink that milk, and then go in a ball down a hill. Like, it's so random to me. There's no real consistency of what they're doing. There's no real challenge theme. What this kind of reminds me of is, I haven't seen much of the show, but if you ever heard of or seen the show Amazing Race, it kind of reminds me of that, where there's like this challenge of like, hey, go do this thing, and then hey, go do this and do this thing. There's not really a reason why you're doing those things, except in the Amazing Race, they don't really need to make much of a point because it's like a travel-based show, so the things they're doing is connected by the place where they're at. But that's what this finale feels like, and there's not a theme of like they're being in a special location or whatever. It's just super out of place, and especially for a finale, it's pretty weird. So I'd put this in C tier. I don't think this is even a terrible challenge, but it just wasn't interesting, and especially for a finale, I would never want to see a finale like this again, where the first half is very interesting, has a lot of high stakes, and the second half that actually decides the winner is kind of random and thrown together. And then we're moving on to the beginning of season 2, the first episode challenge, which was basically red light, green light, with Chef's grandma, I think, being a professional baseball player who would throw paint-filled balloons at the contestants when she caught them on red light. Immediately when I saw this challenge, I obviously thought of Squid Game, and the inspiration was weird. And on paper, I don't feel like this challenge is that interesting because of that. However, in practice and rewatching this episode, I actually really like this challenge, and I really like it for a first episode challenge because, like I said before for the episode 1 challenge in the first season, it's really hard to have a good challenge in the first episode because you're already juggling a lot of things of setting up the season, so it's just hard to find enough time to create a compelling challenge that gives everyone their chance to shine. This challenge does that really well actually, because everyone has their own time to shine of how they get eliminated in the challenge, and for the most part all of them are really unique and show off the characters' personalities. You have Chase being a showboat trying to run past the balloons and try to dodge them, you have Damien getting scared by a wasp and getting himself eliminated, you have Z not being fully focused on the challenge, and the Fizz from the soda getting him eliminated. Some part of me even wishes this was the first challenge we got in the first season because it introduces introduces the cast so well, and I honestly feel bad that it's the first challenge in the second season where this cast is already established cast, because this would have been a really good initial introduction for the cast. Obviously this challenge isn't perfect, it doesn't offer a lot of complexity in the way it's presented, but for a first episode challenge, that's not really an issue because I don't think that's the goal of a first episode challenge. The goal of a first episode challenge shouldn't be to be super creative or intriguing, it should just be a fun way to introduce all the cast, and speaking solely on that metric, this challenge does that well and beyond. Also, as I've just said before, whatever challenges, they can be really big and dramatic and dangerous, and I enjoyed that this one was really simple. It was just a game of red light, green light, and the consequence was only paint-filled balloons. Granted, Grandma Hackett threw them really hard and led to some brutal shots, but it wasn't unrealistic or unnecessarily painful, so because of that, I find this as a pretty good challenge, but again, not a ton of complexity to get up here in A, but I would consider it a very high B tier. And considering this was a first episode challenge, it did it amazing. Like, I don't think realistically almost any first episode challenge will make it into S tier. It's just a hard thing to juggle, and in practice it actually turned out to be, well, I would put it in B tier. Next we have the challenge in episode 2. This one required contestants sliding down dangerous slides, trying to land inside a basketball hoop, and depending on which slide they took, it'd be different point values, and the teams would do it rapidly at the same time, and the first two, I think it was 30 or 20 points, would win the challenge. I think based off some of the previous things I said, you can tell I don't have great opinions on this challenge, so let's start with the good. I really like energy to this challenge. I like how everyone on both teams is allowed to consistently go over and over, because it offers a lot of energy that we rarely see in total drama challenges, so I really enjoyed that change of pace. I also think, speaking on placement of this challenge in this season, episode 2 is a really good point to have these still pretty recently newly established teams with essentially team leaders in Bowie and Priya, because they're the ones who made these teams, get a nice chance to implement some strategy on their teams for which point slides they should go down and what they should prioritize the most, either for going for higher points but risking not making the shot as much, or going for lower points and definitely landing the shots more often, which I kind of forgot to mention, but yeah, that's also an element I liked of this challenge, that there was some strategy of like which point slide you go for. But now with that positive out of the way, let's get to the negative. I did not enjoy how brutal this challenge was. Slapstick comedy has never really been it for me, and watching all the contestants hit the board and go into the hoop brutally over and over again wasn't really necessary to me, and I don't think it was that bad, but I especially just don't like the Damien slide, and not even because my favorite character Damien got tricked down it, but I just think conceptually this slide represents everything I hate about total drama challenges, and also a lot of what I hate about newer modern Chris, where he's just a straight up sadist. I also find the slides themselves to be pretty weird set pieces for this challenge, where I don't feel a lot of continuity between the slides, where I feel like there was a missed opportunity to make this more slide theme related. Like, you have the 3-point slide be a really fast water slide, and maybe the 2-point slide has like a loop. They even still could have added on the other dangerous stuff they want to add if they just made the slides more unique and interesting to look at, because I feel like this was a really missed opportunity to have a challenge theme with these slides into a basketball hoop. Balancing the good with the bad in this challenge, I still do find it in the higher end of challenges, with those negatives and a lot of like brutality that I wasn't into. I don't find it too up on the higher end of these things, and I find it more like a lower B, where it's pretty close to being a C, but I let it go to B just because I like the strategy element of this challenge of deciding which slides you value for points, because we don't get a lot of that, especially in PMR challenges. Next we have the challenge from episode 3, which involved the cast being sprayed with really sticky sap and having to make it across the island in a designated time. Whichever team had more of their contestants at the end of the island before the time ended, it wins the challenge. Like I said with the episode 5 challenge in season 1, we've seen iterations of this concept a lot, but I think this challenge has done it better than anything we've ever seen before, and that's including things like hide and seek and island, where they had to sneak past Chef and get to the lawn chair. I still think this challenge does it better than challenges like that. I'm not saying that this challenge is better than that challenge, but conceptually this challenge does it better. I really like the very simplistic idea of very sticky sap being sprayed into these contestants and having to be careful with what they walk into and what they touch, and I also appreciate how they have obstacles during their path to every end of the obstacle that are specifically related in that, because as I've said a lot, even with just the last episode of the set pieces not being super correlated to the challenge itself, the obstacles in this challenge are very related. There was a point where dodgeballs are dropped into contestants and they had to avoid them without running the risk of carrying dodgeballs for the rest of the challenge. There were points where like they ran into chickens and they had to not get them to attack them, otherwise the chickens would get trapped to them, and most obviously the contestants had to not touch each other in every form, otherwise they'd be stuck to each other. There were a lot of like guidance and rules that people had to follow to fulfill this challenge ideally, which makes it so interesting when people didn't. When Damien and Millie got stuck, when the hockey bros got stuck, when Caleb, Priya, and Emma all got stuck connected to the log. Those are really interesting things that I can confidently say I've never seen in any other challenge, because no other challenge has ever had sticky sap be the focus of its challenge. I find this challenge really creative, really simple, and most honestly, really fun. I struggle honestly knowing where to put this. I feel like it could be S tier. I don't know if when I think of challenges that are really great, like this challenge comes particularly to mind, but I can't really find anything I super dislike with this challenge. Placement of it's good, the concept of it's good, the practice of it's good. Yeah, I think I'm going to put it in S tier. I do think it's a pretty low S tier because I wouldn't consider it quite on par with these two, but I do think it's a really great creative challenge that I personally really enjoyed. Next we have the challenge in episode 4, which is going to be kind of confusing to explain. Contestants one at a time for their team heard other contestants interviewed before the show that were given a would you rather question, and the contestants had to jump on a left or right panel based on which answer they think that contestant would have given. And if they were right, the other platform would drop and they'd continue going. But if they were wrong, their platform would drop and they would drop into, don't remember what it was. It was like a kiddie pool of eels. There was a dangerous water thing that they fell into. This challenge is a bit heavy and complicated. I don't really know why they felt the need that if you get something wrong that you have to drop down into a moat. That feels a bit unnecessary. I guess it was to, again, match the Squid Game theme and also add some more suspense to actually getting it wrong. I think if you separate the parts of this challenge, it's a good challenge. I like the thought of the contestants having to know more about their fellow contestants, so like now knowing the contestants being asked the would you rather question, knowing what they would choose based on your experience with them. I think that's a really interesting concept. Unfortunately, the would you rather questions were kind of weird, so it didn't really matter how much you knew about a person because they could easily just choose one or the other. But still, I think it worked. Quite honestly, the setting being super amplified and dramatic wasn't the big issue to me in this challenge. The big issue is how many would you rather questions that each team had to answer, because mind you, both teams got close, but one team got close because they cheated, and the other team got close because of a joking character scene of Emma being so bad at her guesses. But without either of those two things here, neither team was even remotely close to making it to the end, which means this challenge is kind of, I wouldn't call it rigged, but in a practical sense, it's too difficult. I don't realistically see a way in which any of these contestants could guess more than like 5 while being right, because as I said earlier, there isn't a lot of logic to go in the would you rather aspect. It is basically a 50-50, because even as we saw the early contestants that come on that were super confident the answer they chose because they thought they knew the person were wrong because there's no way to really know. And that's the bigger issue I have with this challenge as a whole, and that it doesn't really feel fair for either of the teams. And I don't even know how Chris would decide a winner if neither team made it to the end, so that's like a whole nother issue in this challenge. I guess he'd probably just go with whoever got further because that makes the most sense. But yeah, my point is there's a lot of holes in the way this challenge is handled because of the size of what is expected from the teams. Because of that unfair stipulation making this not a super enjoyable challenge for me, I put it somewhere around C tier. I do view it personally above both of these challenges, if not only because of the new character dynamics involved in the challenge, which is always something I love. Next we have the challenge in episode 5, which, god, how do you also explain this one? So the teams are put on a massive iceberg, and there are 2 paths carved out in the iceberg, one of which is a maze, and the other of which is like a physical challenge, and one team goes on the physical way, the other team goes on the maze way. The maze way people cheat, and then they get to a safe, which they also cheat to open. Then the safe, I think, gives them keys or something to a raft, which they ride down out of the iceberg. This one is just a lot. I don't really think there's a ton I enjoy about this challenge, and the set piece is really interesting, but as a challenge, it's a lot. In simplicity, most of the time wins favor of me. It is kind of hard to judge this challenge considering that half of the challenge was basically cheated through with MK, so I don't actually know how interesting the maze side could have been if there was like puzzles in the maze, if there was interesting brains that had to be used in it, because the physical side, while being like overly physical, was pretty interesting to watch. I liked watching Caleb, I liked watching Priya and Nichelle work through the physical stuff in the challenge while people like Z and Damien fumbled through the physical parts of the challenge. I think it was a good stark reminder for challenges of physical aspect, which can often be pretty well ignored in total drama, especially when it comes to the P-Merge phase. So I enjoyed that, and I think the maze could have been interesting, but we don't really know. As extreme and just downright unnecessary as this challenge was, I don't think it was a bad challenge. I wouldn't put it in a B for good challenge, but I do think there were parts of this challenge that I liked that I just wouldn't really want to see again. I don't really know where I put it. Honestly, I think I put it here, just because episode 1 still has a lot of leeway from being the first episode, and it's hard to be doing challenge there. The challenge in episode 5 lands about here. I don't think it was a bad challenge. There were parts of it that I liked, but I also think this challenge is representative of the challenges I didn't like in the new seasons, which are the ones that were kind of like really shoehorned and really big to try and make them feel different, when most of the time it didn't really accomplish that. Next we have the merge challenge in season 2. This challenge involved the cast breaking out into duos that would carry a single raft out to the water, where Chris then gave them, I don't know what you call these like metal rods with padding on the ends. He gave them those, and they thought the person they duoed explode with to knock them into the water, and then did it like tournament style till it was the final 2, where it was then treated as a jousting battle where Bowie and Damien were placed on the back of horses, and then they were brought quickly into each other to knock each other off to decide a winner. This challenge was really grounded and really simple, both things that I really enjoy. I don't really know how I feel about this being the first merge challenge, because I think the concept of teaming up with somebody who you then have to betray was interesting. I did see some hesitancy on the betrayals and attacking Bowie and Raj, and I think, I guess kinda Priya, Caleb, and Ripper and Axel, but those ones are kind of quickly decided hey, it's a challenge, we're gonna do it. The challenge would have been more interesting if it was further along in the merge, where these dynamics of the merge cast were more established, and then there's more personal thought between choosing your duo partner, because really it was just everyone chose people who were on their team because they're already connected to their team. So it wasn't really interesting to see these face-offs because there are dynamics that were already established. But I think besides that one minor complaint I have of the placement of this challenge, I think it was a pretty good challenge. I really enjoy challenges where the contestants are fighting each other more so than they're fighting the challenge, because we don't get a lot of them, but when we do, I always really enjoy it. Now I don't think this is anything super groundbreaking, and considering it was a merge challenge, it was kind of weak in the creative thought, but I like the setting in which the challenge took place on the water, and I also liked Chris being on a throne and really making a big deal about this being the first individual invincibility challenge. So I do like it, but I don't think it's a great challenge. So again, I find it in C tier, but I do find it over most of these things because I did like the challenge, and I do think to a degree I would like to see something like this again. I just don't really see in B tier because it wasn't super interesting, but I do think it was a good, fun, easy challenge. I just don't think it should have been the merge challenge. Next we have the challenge in episode 7, which involved the merge cast breaking into teams of 3, or maybe they got randomly assigned a team of 3. Yeah, I think that was it. And then they went out to an island in the water which had a bunch of cake making ingredients, and they fought each other there for the ingredients and brought them back to their baking stations. Each team also got 3 buttons. I don't believe off the top of my head I can remember what the buttons were, but I'll try. One was a button that brought Chef to come help you cook for a bit. One was a button that made one of the other 2 tables have an earthquake shake around their station, which would mess up stuff if they had ingredients unattended. And the third one I think had something to do with Owen, you press it and then Owen can go try and eat one of the cakes of the other teams to mess up. Oh yeah, also Owen made a cameo in this episode, but doesn't matter for the challenge. But yeah, the teams would come back with the ingredients, whatever button they chose, and then they would try to bake a hyper-realistic cake of Chris, where Chris, Chef, and Owen judge their cakes based on how hyper-realistic the cake is and how good it tastes. I really love the concept of this challenge. Again, it kind of matches the episode 11 challenge theme of this being, why is it not going back? Of this being new gen total drama. This challenge was obviously related to the cake or not social media thing. What I don't enjoy is the contestants being put up into groups, because I don't like the fact that we had a merge challenge, and then the first merge challenge involved the contestants breaking out of the groups, and this one also involved contestants breaking out of the groups, because at the merge phase you want to start seeing people go off and kind of do their own things or fight for themselves at a certain point, and to have 2 of those challenges back to back definitely soured my opinion on this challenge a bit. And while I think the buttons were a really interesting concept, they didn't really end up doing a whole lot. But ignoring those issues I listed, which I consider to be pretty minor, this was a really interesting and fun challenge, and I'd put it in A tier above the episode 7 challenge. I don't really see it above these challenges because I think these challenges represent a merge individual challenge a lot better than this one, but conceptually and the theme of this challenge were really interesting. Next we have the challenge in episode 7, and god, do I even begin to explain? This one is so complicated. Okay, so contestants are given a big gold coin which they take up a mountain to put in a slot machine, which they then go down, which then takes them to this arena of whatever you call them, pucks or whatever, pinball hitty things that the contestants have to run into to get points. And there was a bunch of boosters and power-ups and special pieces of Izzy and Crazy Girl and Duncan and Courtney. What a weird, convoluted, crazy challenge. I did like the references of Izzy and Duncan and Courtney. Those were nice callbacks to the original seasons, which is kind of weird because I don't think in this universe that's supposed to be as much of a thing, but I guess especially Owen being the last challenge, that door's already kind of being open, so it was nice to see that. Besides that, this challenge was so uninteresting to me. Kind of one of those challenges that really takes away from the cast and the season itself, because it's just so weird that you have to constantly sit down and get these new parts of the challenge shoved in your face. This challenge didn't sour my experience. It wasn't a bad challenge that I was this is heavy and hard to watch. It was fun to watch in a way, but I also didn't really care tier because it was so weird. So I do put this in D tier for not caring, but I do put it at like a very top of D tier because I do think in a way it was interesting, but there wasn't really any part of this challenge that I enjoyed, so it can't find itself in C tier to me. Next we have the challenge in episode 9 where contestants went on the island to try and find the biggest thing they could find and bring it back to Chris, which he led them to believe was the entire challenge. So every contestant tried to bring back the biggest thing they possibly could, where Chris then revealed, gotcha, you actually have to cut down your big thing into small parts and put it through a little hole in a doorway, and the first person to put their entire big thing through the doorway wins invincibility. This is one of those challenges that when I saw, I really thought, yeah, they're running out of ideas for challenges, aren't they? This is a really weird premise, but I don't hate it for the very simple fact that it's creative. Is it weird? Absolutely, but I don't think it's bad. The only prominent issue I have with this challenge is how you're punished in the first half for doing well. Like, Caleb brought back an entire yacht, and then he was punished by having to break the entire yacht through a hole. Meanwhile, contestants who brought smaller stuff have a much larger advantage. Obviously, Caleb did end up winning the challenge anyways because, he needed to and the writers made it happen. But from a bare bones challenge aspect, Chris basically says screw you for doing well, which I've never enjoyed in challenges. So again, I can't see it quite being in the good challenge tier just because of that part of it being unfair. If it was a fair challenge, I'd probably find it up here because as weird as the concept is, I do think it works and I like the creativity of it. But because it's unfair, I can't call it a good challenge in my head, so it goes down to the C tier. Probably put it around here just because this merge episode challenge should be a lot better. Probably like I hold episode 1 challenges to a lower degree because it's harder. I hold merge challenges to a higher degree because it's supposed to be really setting the tone for the merge. And this challenge I would consider more than the merge challenge because the merge challenge, while not being bad, I think failed at doing what it had to do. Yeah, this is where I put episode 9. Next we have the challenge for episode 10. Contestants stood on what I think Chris called like hurt chambers, pain chambers. They're these circular metal tunnels that they stood on top of. Each of the contestants were given a tablet and there was then a massive TV screen which would flicker the images of all the previously eliminated contestants, and then it would go black and Chris would inform the contestants on which previously eliminated contestant they have to choose on their tablet because it's like a grid pattern and basically a memory game if you had to choose when all the images were flickering. And if you chose the wrong box with a different contestant, you would then be subjected to a punishment based on that contestant. Like if you chose MK when you were supposed to choose Scary Girl, then the bottom of your circle drain would open up and you get blown with a hairdryer because you got it wrong and that's your punishment. And the last contestant to remain standing on their drain would win the challenge. Unfortunately, kind of like the last challenge, I really enjoy the concept of this challenge. In fact, even more so than the last challenge because the last challenge was kind of weird, but the concept of this challenge was really straightforward. And I don't really think we've ever seen any memory game sort of challenge in Total Drama, so it's also unique. But the challenge got completely destroyed and became nothing about the challenge itself of being a memory game because Julian knocked over Damien on his pod and then messed him up. And then when the contestants saw that Chris didn't care about that at all, Damien did it back to Julia, and then Priya did it back to Julia trying to stop her from winning. But basically what I'm trying to say is this challenge stopped becoming about an interesting, intelligent-based individual challenge. Really interesting because we don't get a lot of individual challenges that require intelligence get screwed over by just becoming a physical challenge of, hey, can you knock over this person and force them to get a bad punishment that'll screw them over? Not even mentioning that someone like Damien got screwed over because his punishment was bees that dragged him out of the pod. He didn't even choose to quit, which is the fundamental of this challenge. If you get eliminated, if you quit because of torture your pod, he got dragged out of the pod, which ruins the entire premise. I think essentially what I'm trying to say is that if the premise was done right here, I would probably put this up in like A tier. I would have made it pretty high on this list, but because it was executed so poorly and the entire premise of the challenge was broken, I'd honestly also put it in F tier. Now I do think F tier is a bit harsh. Like I would consider this at like the very, very top. I could just maybe barely see it in D tier. But because the challenge was broken in more way than one, I just can't overlook that and it definitely ruins my enjoyment of this challenge as a whole. The next challenge is the one in episode 11. This challenge involved 5 police trained dogs, each being assigned to one of the contestants to hunt down and bring back to the mat. And if you got brought back to the mat by your dog 3 times, then you were eliminated. And the last contestant to not be eliminated by that standard would win the challenge. We've seen a couple challenges before where contestants are being hunted down by some sort of person. Off the top of my head, there's Island with Chef. In Packet 2 Island, there was the merge challenge where Sugar went to go find the cast and tag them. However, I believe every time we've had a challenge like this, it's always been a human. There's never been anything else like highly police trained dogs. And I think that was interesting to see the cast work around because the dogs, while being very threatening, did have obvious ways to be more successful in avoiding them. You could hide your scent like Julia, you could hide like Raj and Rain in a cabin behind a door. You can make a mannequin. The point is there's a lot of different unique and creative solutions to avoid getting caught by the dogs, which you usually don't see in challenges like this. Also, to add on to that point, each contestant had to get captured 3 times to get eliminated, which means after they got captured twice, they had more knowledge to go about hiding from the dogs, which is something we've never seen in challenges like this. In Island, when it was Chef being the psycho killer, when he found you, that was it. He took you back to the tent, you were eliminated from the challenge. In the merge challenge of Packatoo Island, when Sugar tagged you, that was it. You were eliminated from the challenge. But this challenge actually gives the contestants a chance to reevaluate their strategy and think more creatively about what they should do to avoid the dogs. And I really love that. I love a challenge that allows the contestants to creatively think about what they should do in it and has multiple interpretive ways about how you should face it. So even though we have seen challenges similar to this before, I really liked this version of it, and even go far to say it's the best version we've ever seen of a challenge like this. So I put it into S tier. It's a pretty low S tier, because again, I don't really consider it on par with the other S tier options, but this is a really enjoyable challenge that I can't really find any faults with. It was placed in a really opportune time of the season. The challenge itself allowed creativity and character moments. Again, the only minor complaint is that it isn't super creative and it's kind of been done before, but not every challenge needs to be a new creation. It's okay for challenges to be rehashed sometime, especially when they're rehashed done this well. Next, we have the challenge in episode 12, where contestants are strapped onto a harness that had a hook spot in front of them, and the contestants had to hook each other, where the hooks would then drag them up and would bring them to a box specifically designed with their worst fear. If you faced your fear and got through it, you'd be allowed back into the playing space where you could hook other contestants. If you were able to be the only player in the hooking play space alone, then you would win invincibility. Without being too much of a kiss ass, I also really love this challenge. The concept is really interesting and it mixes elements of phobia factor in a fun merge Final Four way. Unlike the other episode 12 challenge, I think this challenge was really well placed right before the finale. I'm honestly struggling to even find things I can say that I dislike about this challenge. Everything about it worked so well, and even though I don't really like the Caleb and Julia storyline here, I do think there was a lot of interesting strategizing going on about choosing who to hook, especially if all these deals coming in of who you're going to take to the finale. It was good to have a challenge where the contestants had the other contestants' game in their hands. Again, I really can't think of anything I dislike of this challenge. It was placed really well, the concept was super interesting, and it's again one of those challenges that comes to mind when I think of challenges from these Reboot seasons. I definitely put it above this, and I definitely put it above this. Would I put it above that challenge? Don't think I do, and that's only because this challenge did a super good job at being a pre-merge challenge, because as you notice with most of these like ones in A and S tier aren't pre-merge challenges. Pre-merge challenges are a lot harder to get done right, so I appreciate the challenge in episode 4 just that much more for getting it right. And last, but certainly in some ways least, we have the finale challenge in season 2. The finalists got help from eliminated contestants. First, they were put in a massive like gladiator carriage, which their eliminated helper contestants had to help carry them to the next part of the challenge. The next part of the challenge was contestants had to walk across a zip line, while the eliminated contestants shot t-shirt cannons at them to try and knock them off into the water, where they would then have to climb up and try to walk the tightrope again. Was it a tightrope? I'm pretty sure it was a tightrope. Then once they got past the tightropes, they went further up the mountain, where they were then given like squirrel-themed flying suits that they would put on and fly through the air to get to the end section you see here at the finish line, and the first one to get there would win the season. It's contrived. I do like that the eliminated contestants were involved in the challenge, unlike last season. I mean, last season they were kind of related, but not nearly as much as this challenge. And I always think the finale having the eliminated contestants help at least in some aspect is always enjoyable. But as for this 3-part finale challenge, it was weird. I don't think it was a bad finale. I like the settings at which things took place, and it's kind of in a way reminiscent to the Island finale of the entire eliminated cast being involved and there being a tightrope. So I enjoyed that aspect, but at the end of the day, I just don't think this challenge is stuck together cohesively super well. Like, each of the 3 parts is so uniquely distinct of each other, and I think it would have been interesting to try to connect them a bit more. Like, the first part of the challenge had the big carriage, so the second part of the challenge, maybe you could have given the finalists like swords that they can use to hit the t-shirts being shot at them, so there's more counterplay instead of just getting hit by a t-shirt and having to start over. Was it a t-shirt cannon? I'm doubting myself now. It was something. They shot something at them. It doesn't matter. I don't remember this challenge super well. And then for the third part, I actually don't know how you keep the gladiator theme at that point. You could make it a squirrel diving suit at that point, I guess, because it's kind of funny misdirection. But my point is, cohesion was not here for this challenge, and it was also a race. And I think it's honestly harder at this point in total drama to think of finales that aren't a race. The last season's finale was a race, Packatoo Island's finale was a race, All Stars finale was a race, Revenge of the Island wasn't, World Tour basically was, and Island was. So Action and Revenge of the Island are the only 2 season finale that you can indefinitely say are in some way a race. So because of that, creativity factor is in here, the cohesion factor is in here, and I don't think it was a very satisfying way to declare a winner. Now again, I don't think this is a terrible finale challenge. I liked parts of it, so it goes in C tier. And yeah, I would put it above this finale. I'd probably also put it above this. So yeah, this is my ranking of the Reboot season challenges. This was a nice change of pace of video to be working with. Despite the unsavory things I had to say about some of these challenges, I think again looking by my tier list and seeing there was only like 5 in D and F tier, I mostly really enjoyed and was really impressed by the challenges in these Reboot seasons. Challenges have never really been a huge point of contention to me when it came to these new seasons, because I think you can absolutely have a good season even if the challenges are subpar, which is why it amazes me that much more that challenges, even though at times being kind of unfair, being convoluted, being really dramatic, were for the most part, like 90% part, really interesting and really fun. Alright, that's the end of my video. Bye.